Hello and welcome back to another episode of What If on HITC Football, where we explore how the footballing world could have changed if some key moments had gone differently. In today's episode, we're going to have a look at one of the most famous Premier League moments of all time, as we ask, what if Steven Gerrard never slipped against Chelsea back in 2014? For anyone who doesn't remember, and we can't imagine there are many of you, back in the 2013-14 season, Liverpool were leading the title race with just 3 games of the campaign to go. The Reds needed just 7 points from their final 3 matches, and the title would have been theirs. The Merseyside club had just 3 hurdles to clear at that point: Chelsea at home, Crystal Palace away, and Newcastle at Anfield. Sounds easy, right? Unfortunately though, Liverpool surrendered their advantage at the first hurdle, losing 2-0 to Chelsea, with the decisive opening goal being scored by Demba Ba after Steven Gerrard slipped and gave the Senegalese striker a free run on goal. The legendary Liverpool captain cost his team the league that year, just 2 weeks after ironically claiming, "This does not slip now," after a 3-2 win against their rivals Manchester City. Ultimately, it would be City who won the league that year, claiming the title in Manuel Pellegrini's first season in charge. But what if Gerrard hadn't slipped? There is the school of thought that Gerrard's slip was inconsequential. After all, that game did end up 2-0, and if you take away Bar's goal, it would be 1-0, leaving the 3 points still headed back to Stamford Bridge. However, as always, context is key. Chelsea's second strike was a late goal that came from a counter-attack after Liverpool committed way too many players forward from a set piece. And quite simply, if the game was 0-0, that doesn't happen. Now, we're not going to argue that Liverpool would have won that game that day if Gerrard hadn't slipped. This was a match against the Jose Mourinho team that was still in the title race in their own right, so they would have been incredibly difficult to break down. However, this match was an incredibly cagey affair, and if Gerrard doesn't slip, we're actually tipping this game to end up 0-0, which, while it wasn't ideal, would still leave Liverpool with a slight advantage over City heading into their final 2 games. With a draw against Chelsea in the books, is Crystal Palace away up next, and this should have been an easy win for Liverpool if Gerrard didn't slip. Let's not forget, the Reds were 3-0 up in this match before a late rally from Palace, but that so-called Cristanbul comeback, that would never have happened if Liverpool weren't foolishly chasing City's unattainable goal difference tally, playing all-out attack football in the final knockings of that game. After a win at Selhurst Park, Liverpool would only have needed a victory against Newcastle to secure the title, and just like in real life, we're tipping the Reds to beat the Magpies in the final game of the season. So without Gerrard's slip, Liverpool win the Premier League for the first time in 2014. That would be a brilliant place to end this video after just 3 minutes, but Liverpool's triumphs would have sent so many potential shockwaves throughout the footballing world, and that's what we're going to look at today. So if Liverpool triumph in 2014, what else changes? First and foremost, we think that Luis Suarez would have stayed at Liverpool for at least 1 more season. Think about it. Why would you leave a club who've just won one of the biggest prizes within the game when you've only just signed a new contract up until 2018? Barcelona may have come calling at the time, but with a Premier League winners' medal in his cabinet, we think that Suarez would have knocked Barca back for at least 1 more year. However, sadly for Liverpool, Suarez was always destined for bigger and better things. And while this Liverpool team was quality, we're not expecting them to repeat the trick and overcome Mourinho's Chelsea in 2014-15. The Reds did finish 6th that season in our reality, and while Suarez was good, he wasn't good enough to drag a team from 6th to being back-to-back champions. Although, saying that, Suarez's influence may not have been enough to make Liverpool 2-time Premier League winners, but he could have brought enough to that team to lead them to a top 4 finish, in turn, buying Brendan Rodgers some more time in the Liverpool hot seat. In our reality, Rodgers was sacked in October 2015, but if he had a title win and another top 4 finish on his CV, surely he would have been cut a bit more slack by the hierarchy at Liverpool. Now, we're not saying that Rodgers would have created a dynasty at Anfield, but the timing of this sacking would surely have been different if he'd won the league and then finished in the top 4, and we think he would have lasted at least until the end of the 2015-16 season. So if Rodgers is staying put at Anfield for just a little while longer, what does that mean for Jurgen Klopp? After leaving Borussia Dortmund, Jurgen Klopp was more than ready to take a job in the autumn of 2015, and the Liverpool role came up at the perfect time for the German. But in this reality, Rodgers has more credit in the bank at Anfield, and he isn't sacked at this point, denying us not only one of the best moments in Sky Sports history, but also stopping Klopp from joining Liverpool at that point. A manager of Klopp's quality was never going to be out of work for too long, so where does he end up? After an absolutely shocking start to the 2015-16 season, the Chelsea job was about to become available. Jose Mourinho was sacked that December, and Klopp would surely have been the number 1 candidate to take up that job if he was still out of work. So Klopp heads to Chelsea in 2015, and that would create a huge power shift in the Premier League at that point. As we know, that Chelsea team was ready to challenge immediately. They were the league champions in 2015, and with a little bit of tinkering from Klopp, it would have been very easy to get them back to that level, in a similar way to how Antonio Conte did it in our reality. In fact, thinking as a neutral, it's a real shame that Klopp never got to have a go at managing this team. Cesar Azpilicueta and David Luiz would have made a brilliant centre-back partnership, more than capable of playing Klopp's patented high line. A prime Marcos Alonso would be brilliant as an Andy Robertson-esque left-back, and while he didn't get much of a chance at Chelsea under Mourinho or Conte, we can see Klopp getting the best out of a certain Juan Cuadrado as an attack-minded right-back in the role he's thrived in at Juventus for the past 5 years. Nemanja Matic would have been perfect as a sitter in Klopp's 4-3-3, in the same way Fabinho is these days, while we can imagine that N'Golo Kante would have been used as more of a number 8, as he was under Thomas Tuchel in the 2020-21 Champions League winning campaign. Meanwhile, this hypothetical version of Klopp, he couldn't have asked for a better substitute for a modern day Thiago than a prime Cesc Fabregas, could he? As mouth-watering as that defence in the midfield sounds, up front is where it gets really interesting. The presence of Diego Costa in the squad probably means that Klopp doesn't bring the false 9 to the Premier League at this point, altering the tactical landscape of the division for years, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'd be any less successful. Costa would be leading the line as a traditional number 9, albeit with more focus on pressing from the front, but it's the players that would be flanking him who would make this Chelsea team so good. It pretty much goes without saying how brilliant Eden Hazard would be down the left. He was arguably the best player in the league at this point. But rather than using Pedro or Willian down the right, we think that Klopp might have gone in a slightly different direction. Yeah, we can't see Klopp going for Pedro or Willian. In fact, there was a young winger contracted to Chelsea at that point who didn't get much of a look in, who may have gotten more of a shot under Klopp. You might have heard of him. His name was Mohamed Salah. Yes, if Klopp had gotten the Chelsea job in 2015, we have to assume that one of his first ports of call would have been to get Salah back from his loan spell at Roma and get him straight into the first team. The past 6 years have shown us just how much Klopp loves Salah, and he most certainly would have made the most of his presence at Chelsea. With Salah, Hazard and Costa ripping it up in the attack, Klopp's Chelsea would have been a joy to watch. But what becomes of Liverpool if they don't reel the German in at that point as their new manager? As we said earlier, Brendan Rodgers probably wouldn't have lasted beyond 2016, even with a title win and a Suarez-inspired top 4 finish under his belt. But with Klopp out of the picture, the Reds will need another manager. Luckily for us, it's not hard to envisage the direction Liverpool would go in if they were looking for a new manager in the summer of 2016. With Klopp at Chelsea, Liverpool would surely have been all over Antonio Conte around this time after Euro 2016. We think that Conte would go to Liverpool as Rodgers eventually falters, but unfortunately, unlike his spell at Stamford Bridge, he doesn't taste immediate success. Conte has always had a bit of a dodgy relationship with any owners he worked with, but as Liverpool have shown with Klopp, they're not afraid to trust a manager and allow him to build a long-term vision, and that would suit Conte to a T. It's something he's never really had at any other club. Don't discount the fact that the Italian will be working with the Reds' sporting director Michael Edwards, and if any transfer strategist is able to build the perfect squad for Conte, it's Edwards. Edwards is the man largely behind building Liverpool's current squad, taking them from pretenders to contenders in recent years, and while building a Conte team is a different challenge, it's one we're sure he'd be up to. Realistically, this team is already in decent shape to play in Conte's style. Emre Can would have been brilliant in a back three, and he'd probably have signed a new deal if he'd been handed a more prominent role in a team that had recently tasted success with a Premier League title. However, new centre-backs would be needed. Joel Matip likely would never have joined without Klopp's Bundesliga links to bring him in, but a move for Virgil van Dijk should eventually come to fruition, while Conte of course brought Antonio Rudiger to Chelsea during his time at Stamford Bridge, so perhaps he'd have been Anfield bound instead. A front three that could utilise the likes of Felipe Coutinho, Sadio Mane and Roberto Firmino would work a charm, but as Conte's teams have shown with the likes of Romelu Lukaku, Harry Kane and Diego Costa, they'll need a focal point striker. Of course, Romelu Lukaku would have been the ideal signing at this time. After all, Conte wanted him back at Chelsea around this point and he adored him at Inter Milan. But given his Everton affiliations at this time, it's hard to imagine that transfer going ahead. Liverpool did have an in-house solution available to them in the shape of Mario Balotelli, but Conte wouldn't have had much use for him, having never used him during his 2-year spell as Italy manager. So if it's not going to be Lukaku or Balotelli, who is it going to be up front for Liverpool? The most logical option would perhaps be Graziano Pella. As strange as it sounds, the Italian was lighting up the Premier League with Southampton at this time, and we all know how much Liverpool love to make a signing from the south coast. Meanwhile, he was also playing regularly under Conte for Italy, with a more than respectable record of 7 goals in 17 appearances under the former Chelsea boss. With the right coaching and in the right team, Pella could have been a 15 to 20 goal a season striker. He did hit double figures for Southampton in each of his 2 full seasons in England, and if Trent Alexander-Arnold and Andy Robertson were utilised to their full attacking capabilities in a 3-4-3 system, there would have been chances galore for Pella to get on the end of. With Trent at the back, Pella up front, Trent and Robertson on the wings, there is a lot to like about a potential Liverpool team under Conte, but sadly, we can't see them being anywhere near as successful as they have been in recent years, due to the sheer brilliance of Pep's Manchester City and this hypothetical Chelsea team under Klopp. Instead of Liverpool being a top team in Europe, Klopp's Chelsea take the Reds' place as the closest challengers to Manchester City over the past 5 years, winning a couple of Premier League titles, and we also think they win at least 2 Champions League trophies. After all, a star-studded Chelsea squad in 2018 playing in Klopp's style would have been just as good as the Liverpool team that were beaten by Real Madrid in Kiev by virtue of 2 Loris Karius mistakes. Mistakes that most definitely wouldn't have been made by Thibaut Courtois. Actually, this Chelsea team could easily have repeated the trick in 2019 in place of Klopp's Liverpool. While depending on how long Roman Abramovich would have given Klopp as the manager, the Blues could also have taken the 2021 crown with Klopp, just as they did in real life under Thomas Tuchel. At the time, Steven Gerrard's slip seemed like the end of the world for Liverpool fans. It was the lowest point of what had been a turbulent period for the Merseyside club, but in the end, it may have actually been the best thing to happen to the Reds. If Gerrard hadn't slipped, yes, Liverpool may have won the league that year, but that would most likely have led to Brendan Rodgers outstaying his welcome at Anfield, and Jurgen Klopp never breathing a new life into this squad, with the German taking his talents to West London instead. So what do you think? What else changes if Gerrard never slips? Does the midfielder himself postpone his departure from Anfield? Where do Manchester City go after missing out on the 2013-14 title? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Tell us which what if you want us to look at next. And as always, like and subscribe for more football content.